spirit seemed very much to be in the.
I think it would.
There's a little red
dedicated,
bit.
resigned to the
Accepting
fact
of
that
the
they might not
reality.
do as well as they could. And I was there, one all FA Cup national draw at home to Brentford.
Oh, okay.
I think it was Brentford. But it's very deflating.
But Mike, you'll be able to see yourself.
No,
Got a
Mel-
little bit of a
Mel-
slot as well.
Oh, yeah.
Mel-
Before we had it set up,
Okay.
Kim showed the whole audience.
Yeah, that's right.
It's okay. Just shows maybe
Yeah.
speaking.
You know.
Like
Lizzie
start on
and,
time since we've got knowledge on all kinds of places. Just a minute.
Right,
they
yeah.
live, that's what they live.
They'll be living the highlights at the moment.
Right, okay, we'll get started. Tēnā koutou katoa, welcome to the first in the 2024 series of weekly bioethics seminars. My name is Josephine Johnston. I'm an associate professor here at the University of Otago's Bioethics Centre, and I will also be chairing today's seminar. The bioethics seminar series runs on Mondays from 1 to 2 p.m. New Zealand time and features local, national and international speakers addressing a wide variety of issues in bioethics. Speakers and audience members are invited to attend in person here at the Bioethics Centre in Dunedin or online via Zoom. If you want to be added to our mailing list, just email bioethics@otago.ac.nz. Before I introduce today's speakers, I just want to take a minute for some housekeeping for people on Zoom. Just a reminder to please keep yourself muted during the presentation so as not to disrupt the speaker. Today's seminar will run for 1 hour from 1 to 2 p.m. Questions and discussions are a key part of our weekly seminars, and so our speakers will speak or are asked to speak for about 25 to 30 minutes, and then we turn questions over to the audience, and I will moderate that Q&A part. If you're on Zoom and have questions for our speaker, please use the chat or raise hand function during the Q&A period, and I'll call on you. If you have a question and put it in before then, we will just leave it until the Q&A period. If you're in the seminar room when the Q&A period happens, you're just invited to raise your hand and I'll call on you. Now, it's my absolute pleasure, and I think it's really fitting that we kick off our annual seminar series with our head of department here, Dr. Mike King. He's senior lecturer at the University of Otago, and Mike actually trained as an animal scientist, which led him to develop an interest and expertise in the ethics of animal research. And today his research draws on those early academic experiences in the life sciences, as well as on moral and political philosophy. A main theme in Mike's research is the ethical treatment of animals in research, farming, veterinary care, and as companions, topics he also addresses through his role on New Zealand's National Animal Ethics Advisory Committee. The title for Mike's seminar today is Social License is a Problem for Digital One Health. To you, Mike.
Great, thanks, Josie, and thanks everyone for coming. So One Digital Health, Digital One Health. I was at a conference in Hong Kong, and thanks to Kelvin and the Centre for Medical Ethics and Law at Hong Kong University for taking me and Nick, one of our collaborators, over to that conference where I gave this talk. And that was focused on Digital One Health, but one of the topics was sort of, is it One Digital Health, Digital One Health, quite what it is. So the idea, and I'll get to this later, is that it's One Health, and I'll explain what that is later on if that's not familiar to you, with digital attributes like computers and stuff. And this is one of those talks I was thinking when I was going through it just before this. It seems a bit niche, you know. There's health, then there's One Health. That's a sort of a sub area within health, and there's did the digital aspects of that also niche, and then I'm looking at the social license aspects of that in particular. And so hopefully that means that it's not just exclusive, there's something in it for lots of people, but also it does raise some pretty general issues, I think, that I'm happy to talk about as well. And also, this talk is focused on some work and arises from some MB grant funded research that Nick Liebergreen, Lynley Anderson, and it's led by Greg Cook, formerly of microbiology, or he still has a fractional appointment in microbiology, but he's also in Brisbane now. And so that's focused on antimicrobial resistance, or the development of animal-only antimicrobials, and I'll get into that in a moment. And so I've sort of got that particular focus within this talk as well. Now, can I move on? So this disclosure is about that project. So that project is developing antimicrobials that are for animal-only use, and it aims to sell these. So it is as most MB grant funded projects are, aims to produce something that's economically valuable for New Zealand, and that's what this project does. However, I don't stand to benefit economically, unfortunately, financially, other than being employed on the project, which is great. So antimicrobial resistance, this is, you can't quite see it, but it says worldwide transmission of antimicrobial resistance. This is see a map of the world that shows routes of travel and how often they're used, and the antimicrobial resistance bugs that have arisen there, the genes. Antimicrobial resistance, it's a big problem anyway, but just to make clear, in 2019, about 1.3 million deaths were attributed directly to antimicrobial resistance. And in that year, a further almost 5 million deaths it was a contributor to. So it's a big problem that kills people at a large scale. And that was in 2019, and it's likely to have got worse since then. And a big driver for it is that it is a global problem. Right, so that means it doesn't just implicate countries, individual countries. It implicates travel between countries, agreements between countries, and so on. So international agreements are needed in order to address antimicrobial resistance. If we look at the different factors contributing to antimicrobial resistance, you can look at how much evidence there is for the different factors that are sort of hypothesized. And then you can look at how much they might contribute to the development of antimicrobial resistance. And you don't want your factor to be in the top right. Well, you do if it's solvable, I suppose. And some of these seem like they could be. Top right, you have human antimicrobial misuse or overuse. People misprescribing antimicrobials, people taking them in the wrong way. Also there, almost directly entirely overlapping it, is animal antimicrobial misuse and overuse. Both of these things are taken to have high evidence for a high contribution to the development of antimicrobial resistance. And it's thought that they're linked. It's thought that the overprescription, the misuse or overuse of antimicrobials in animals is a driver for the development of antimicrobial resistance in people. The evidence for that, I think, isn't super strong, but there is some evidence for it. And it's something that you don't want to take a gamble on if it is, in fact, a cause. So addressing animal antimicrobial misuse and overuse is important, as well as addressing human antimicrobial misuse and overuse. And we know that a large amount of antimicrobials go to animals, particularly in animal production, as well as they're also used in companion animal care and things like that. Down here, you can see this little green circle, and that's environmental contamination. there's less evidence, sort of moderate, sort of middling there, right? One Health unites humans, animals, and the environment. And the health of humans and animals, if we can think of the health of the environment, then perhaps that's in there as well. But certainly the environment is in there as a vector, really, that means that bugs that are affecting animals can also affect humans that share the same environment. And there is some evidence of antimicrobial resistance genes arising in people, and they're the same genes that are present in the animals that they're sharing an environment with. Okay, so those are problems. So you've got humans and animals coming up here, and the link between them. It's this sort of drug resistance link, the idea that there's a resistome that is shared across humans and animals. So when you're thinking about antimicrobial resistance, you're wanting to solve both of these problems, right? And the proposal of the MB grant that is funding this research and the other research on that grant is that this problem arises when you use the same antibacterials to treat diseases in animals and people, because then the bugs will develop resistance to those drugs. So when you use them in animals, any resistance that's developed there could affect the effectiveness of those drugs when you use them in people as well. So the idea of the project is we should use different classes of antimicrobials in non-human animals from people, and that way any resistance that develops won't be something that will affect people, because those people won't use those antimicrobials. This raises a whole lot of ethical problems, like if you're developing new antimicrobials, why don't you give them to people? They matter more than animals, or something like that. One Health has a bit of an answer to that, which is that you need to look after both of these things. You can't just hive off all the good drugs for people and just let the animals fend for themselves when it comes to having good healthcare. But anyway, that's the idea with the project. Develop specific classes of antimicrobials for use in animals, and don't use those in people. That criticism I've addressed in other work, or we've addressed in other work. That criticism that you should use these drugs in people assumes that they are available, that they could be deployed. It would be a good thing to do that, right? That people could benefit. The particular antimicrobials that are being looked at, the particular molecules in the project, are molecules that called ionophores that aren't used in people because they're toxic at lethal doses. Sorry, lethal at therapeutic doses in people. And so if they're used in animals, they're not toxic in that way. And so the idea is that you're actually not depriving people of anything that would benefit them if you use these antimicrobials just in animals. Okay, so the scenario that the project envisages, sort of setting aside that ethical problem that I just talked about there, would require a lot of cooperation between the people using these drugs and developing them for use in animals and people, so that there isn't any diversion that might happen. Perhaps there's some forms of it that at a certain dose, maybe they could try in people, maybe they'd be desperate enough to do that. It also requires understanding the ways that they're used in animals, still working on reducing the use in animals and reducing the requirement for antimicrobial use in animals. A lot of the time it's used because the farming systems aren't very good for animals. There's lots of bugs around it, so you need to use antimicrobials. Or because people want high growth rates, and this is one way to achieve that. So you need a lot of good surveillance, you need a lot of good regulation, and you need trusted people making decisions that people are going to believe in when those decisions affect what they want to do on their farm or what they want to do in the vet clinic and so on. So you need a lot of trust in the system for these products to work. right? And if people don't trust it, then they're not going to use it, or they're going to continue to misuse it. And that means it's not going to be beneficial. The sort of outcomes that that this proposal envisages, that the project envisages, wouldn't be realized, or wouldn't be realized to their full extent. So the sort of trust and cooperation and everything that's needed, you need vets and clients working toward, reducing antimicrobial use. You need vets and clients understanding that these are the only drugs that they can prescribe, and they're not going to prescribe drugs that they're currently prescribing. They're not going to use the human drugs. And you need vets not using those, even if perhaps they're cheaper, and cheaper for clients to use as well. And people don't always have a lot of money to spend on their animals' healthcare. Also, cooperation and trust among vets, that they're all doing the same thing, and that they're all going to hold themselves to this regulatory standard or whatever it is. Because there can be benefits in departing from that potentially, particularly if clients want it, or if... You also need agreement and trust amongst the people that are doing healthcare for people. And so this unites these two healthcare sectors of veterinary and human healthcare. And that's a feature of One Health, is this kind of bringing together of sectors across different species. And obviously regulators locally, nationally, and internationally looking at that global perspective, because New Zealand, well-regulated place, or some other similarly well-regulated country could move in this direction, but plenty of other countries, which perhaps aren't as, don't have as much resource as we do, or whatever, might not be so able to regulate what's going on, and might not have the same ability to move in that direction, especially if it was more costly. And then also looking at the agreements that would be needed here, and the trust and cooperation and so on. So aside from sectors, you'd also be looking at different groups of people, different social groups, Māori, Pākehā, urban and rural. So if farmers are all regulated to move in this direction, then why would companion animal owners not have to do that as well? And there can be mistrust or distrust between the rural and urban groupings that those two comprise, and all sorts more. So cooperation and trust are going to be hard to achieve here, I think, because there's all sorts of personal benefit that could be gained from departing from following this proposal. So assuming universal compliance isn't something that should be done. So this kind of trust, cooperation, acceptance, and so on is sometimes referred to as social license. I hear this term a lot, comes up a lot in animal research, used freely. It actually originates in mining, and it comes up a lot in other extractive sorts of industries. And it's regarded as a sketchy kind of a concept because of that. This guy, Jim Cooney, is the guy who came up with it. He was an executive for Placer Dome, which was sort of, I think, slightly creepily named thing, Placer Dome. Anyway, that's a extractive, mining company. And he was just describing what he saw as necessary. They would go to these countries, and there would be some political regime there who would say, hey, you need our approval to get on with your extractive work here, and we give it. But then they would, when they go to try and do this, encounter all sorts of social disruption, people not accepting what's going on. And he thought, we can't operate this way, where we just brute force our way in because we've got political license to do it. We need social license to do it as well. So he thought, we need people to see reason to accept what it is that we're doing if we're going to do it. And he was quite pragmatic about it. He thought it was sort of pragmatic consideration, that you need sustainable development frameworks and all sorts of things that are needed and sometimes developed with the people that you're, whose environment you're working in. in order to get on with your work. So you need a positive relationship with local people, the sort of permission of the community or social license. He was a Canadian Institute of Mining Hall of Fame inductee in 2023. And I think he won some sort of sustainability awards as well. So here's, there's all sorts of different graphs about social license. I just chose one that I think looks sort of pretty good. So if you don't have social license, your activity is rejected by the community. They're going to oppose it in all sorts of ways. Very hard for you to get on with what you're doing. Right? And so that means you can't do it easily. It's very expensive for you to do it if you try to do it. And to the extent, it's going to be you're less able to realize what it is you want to do if people oppose it. Right? So that's the withheld, withdrawn bit. They don't regard what you're doing as legitimate. If they do regard it as legitimate, they might sort of accept it. I think sort of tolerate, right? They'll view it as perhaps something that they disapprove of, but they accept that it goes on. They're not going to do much to support it. And then if they regard it as not only a legitimate thing to do, but something that they see as sort of credible, then they might approve of it. Right? And if they approve of it, then they're going to support it in various ways. They might see that it's valuable for them as well. And if they trust the people who are doing it, then they will start to psychologically identify with the extractive mining industry or something. Yeah, we're all little miners inside or something like that, right? So there is a slightly sketchy, sort of slightly creepy sort of side to this, particularly if you regard the activities going on here as things that people ought not to psychologically identify with, right? But that's about the activity, right? So that's not about the concept, I think, or at least not yet. So that's what social license is, right? Trying to gain this acceptance, and there's degrees of acceptance right through to them trusting and sort of becoming part of the, at least psychologically, part of what's going on. Tim Dare has a good paper where he puts the boot into this concept, regards it as problematic in all sorts of ways, that it's a disreputable concept that is largely just descriptive and doesn't have any valuable normative content to offer. Right? It just describes the acceptance of an activity going on. And if people accept it, that doesn't mean that it's an acceptable, sort of morally acceptable thing that goes on. If they trust what's going on or psychologically identify with whatever, it doesn't mean that it's worthy of that sort of attitude towards it. I think those are reasonable criticisms to make, and we could perhaps explore them a little bit more. But let's just imagine that in order to get social license, imagine for the purposes of this talk, take it as an assumption that this is a sort of a thick concept. In order to have social license, you need what's going on to be accepted, right? By the lights of people accepting it. And that it needs to be trustworthy if they trust it, right? So it has some content that means that the activity going on is deserving of that acceptance, right? And it also describes what they do, which is the acceptance and trust. So it's both descriptive and has some normative content as well. So I'm going to say that one digital health, or one health, you could imagine the antimicrobials situation has all sorts of problems in trying to achieve it. So One Health has a nice picture that represents it. And again, if you look it up, you can find all sorts of things that look all sort of swirly and uniting of different things, humans, animals, and the environment, right? So the idea is, and antibiotics and antimicrobials usually come up quite a lot here as things that unite humans and animals via the environment, often because bugs are in the environment. So One Health has all sorts of definitions around, but it relies on a claim that human and animal health are linked, and they're especially linked via the environment. And there's animals in the environment as well, and people obviously as well. And also that One Health is the cooperation, a multi-sectoral cooperation across humans, animals, and the environment, and people working with them in order to make progress on the healthcare of any of these groups. Right, so this can be detecting bugs and identifying them, doing all the sanitation work and so on, where things go into the environment, including antimicrobials, and bugs, and animals are in the environment, and people might be going in there as well. Like, just think of the harbour here. All of these groups face trade-offs in any cooperative agreement that that you might have here. And, so one that the MB project aims to address is the competition between humans and animals over antimicrobial use. So if they're using the same antimicrobials, then we're fighting over the same products, and each has an interest in exclusively having them used in them. The aim of the MB project is to solve that problem, catering to animals without imposing some opportunity cost on people. So sort of solves that trade-off, and solves the sort of collective action problem that can arise there. So there's a lot of problems in One Health to do with getting agreement across these different sectors, given that they have interests that are often in competition. Also, animals in the environment don't have advocates for them, or at least not in the same way that people do. The environment has a commissioner for the environment, so that's an advocate for the environment. There's no commissioner for animals. You can see me and Marcelo's article on that, where we argue that we should have one. But you do have political parties that, to differing extents, advocate for animals. But so in solving or resolving any trade-offs here, it's quite hard to do that in a way that sufficiently recognizes the interests of animals in the environment, I think. So often a focus of One Health is on human health. That can be a strength of it, because if you focus on human health, and if you're exclusively focused on that, you can still say, well, if you want humans to be healthy, then you need animals in the environment to be looked after as well. But they are vulnerable moral subjects, and so they can always get shortchanged there. Also, people have different moral orientations when it comes to animals in the environment as well. So there's not such agreement as there is around people. And I noticed this in animal ethics versus human ethics. In animal ethics, there is much more disagreement about what the entitlements of animals are to protection and so on. Whereas in human ethics, that's usually not something that's talked about so much. Trust can be lacking between many of the stakeholders here, such that they don't often want to agree to, for example, surveillance, which would be needed for any One Health project. And so achieving social license here, well, just a little example, surveillance could mean things like, getting use or prescription statistics from vets about how much they're prescribing antibiotics. And then you often need to know, or someone needs to know, where those are going so that they could be the effects could be anticipated and addressed. And people don't want to be identified as users of antibiotics or prescribers of antibiotics, particularly if it's something that they have an interest in continuing. So achieving social license for One Health, the agreement of all of these competing, and to some extent, because of that, not entirely trusting of each other groups, is a big task. Now, if you look at the digital aspects of One Health, if you take One Health and you overlay digital stuff to it, then I think these problems become amplified. So imagine One Health, but you now have massive data sets collected. The information could be collected by AI surveillance systems. That information could then be stored somewhere, trawled over by AI, or trawled over by researchers. You'd have to have all sorts of data sharing agreements and stuff in order for that to work in ways that respect people's privacy. And also, if people are sharing information, they're going to want to know what it's going to be used for. And animals have an interest in this as well. So someone would ideally be representing those interests as well. And if we have, for example, an AI system looking over it, there might be some limits to the extent, it seems like there's some limits to the extent that we can predict what might come out of that in terms of what ought to be done. You can get more resolution, you can get more fine-grained data when you have digital systems overlaid on One Health. And when you have more fine-grained data, that's more useful. This could be individuals and their uses, or farmers or animals. And when you have that, then that makes individuals and farmers and animals a little bit more vulnerable. There's good work trying to solve these problems, and I'll mention one of them in the next slide. And most of them require AI systems to be explainable. And I think that there are big problems with that as well. There's good literature, sort of ethics literature about AI systems and whether it makes any sense at all to trust them, whether AI is the kind of thing that can be trusted. And in particular, when it can do things that the people who created it had no way to foresee that it would do that. And this is a problem for self-driving cars as much as a problem for anything that has all sorts of health information and deciding what ought to happen there. So people put humans in the system to try and be a check on it. So those aren't good conditions, I think, for people even tolerating what might go on here, let alone psychologically identifying with it, especially if you're psychologically identifying with something that has AI in it, which is something that we currently find very hard to even get a good handle on what it is. So I said the normative and descriptive aspects of the concept of social license are necessary for it to have it. And those are also necessary, I think, for One Digital Health to be beneficial, right? If it's not beneficial, people aren't going to provide information. They're not going to accept the surveillance that would be going on. They're not going to agree to their taxes going to disease identification, which would generate the data. And then you can group people together into their different sectors, and then you have group disagreement as well. So on the normative side, right, One Digital Health is trustworthy. You have proposals to try and make it trustworthy, right? And here's the one that I mentioned. This is Kelvin Ho. Kelvin was one of the researchers who I thanked at the start, who brought me in over to Hong Kong to give out talks. So he and co-authors have a good article there where they try to explain some principles, that would make it trustworthy. And they're good, they're good principles. It should be sustainable and it should protect privacy and all of that kind of thing. Right? So it's one thing to work out what it would take to make it trustworthy. It's another thing to work out making it worthy of that trust, helping it to One Digital Health to actually achieve those things. This proposal that they have, one of the principles is that it should be that any One Digital Health system should be able to explain what it is that it's doing to those people that it's benefiting, or who it's whose information it's holding and using. Explainability is something that is a big problem in AI, and it's going to get even harder. Or it's a big research problem, and people are trying to solve it. Maybe they will solve it. That would be great if they did. It's very important that they did, and if they did, then that means that the social license could be more able to be achieved, because they could explain why the AI system is saying you need to do X, not prescribe this, or prescribe more of it, or something like that. I don't know why to prescribe more. It needs to explain it, right? So that's explainability. It's possible that explainability may eventually, we're at an early stage with AI, that it may outrun our capacity to understand. Then we've got a real big problem. AI at the moment is unpredictable, and there's quite a lot of work, or a huge amount of work gone into AI safety, putting guardrails in place, putting humans in the chain, all of that kind of thing, right? But the unpredictability is persisting, and it's argued by some in AI that this is a persistent feature of AI systems, and it's just something we have to live with. It's going to be unpredictable. So plan for the unpredictability would be the approach to that. One of the other approaches is to align AI in terms of the values that it would be using to make any decision. So even if we can't understand why it's saying do X, we know if we've value aligned it, we should know that whatever it says aligns with what we would want if we had all of those faculties and all of that information and so on, right? So that's value alignment, that its values align with our values. There is a view that AI could improve on our values, right? That it could become better than we are at doing ethics. Why not? If it does, then we've got a problem, which is that our values could be limiting it, right? We think our values are good. Perhaps AIs come up with better options, but if it can't explain them to us, then we've got a big problem here. So we're at a stage with AI, I think, where there's a lot of uncertainty, and we don't know quite how these will resolve. Perhaps people can solve them. But while there is this uncertainty, there's good reason to hold back on any large-scale deployment, I think. Value alignment. Also, an issue with value alignment is, think of that picture of One Health. We would have to incorporate values not just about people, but about animals and about the environment. And remember that animals and the environment, we don't have particularly settled values when it comes to this. So how it would align with what the right thing to do is there, how we would settle on that is tricky, and therefore how it would align with it is too. So that's problems for the normative aspect of it. For the descriptive aspect, that people trust Digital One Health because it's trustworthy. So let's imagine that it's trustworthy, and we know that it is trustworthy, right? We know. And if it is trustworthy, then people ought to trust it. And if they do trust it, then it can be really beneficial. That seems like a good thing, because people would respect what it says and fall in line with it. So, but trust isn't something that we agree on either. And you might be, think of the scale of the problem that we're looking at. It's across everybody in the world. Is trust a concept in that culture? Does it have a different form? Perhaps trust isn't a thing. There's some other concept that does some of the work or something like that. So both philosophical accounts and folk accounts of trust are going to differ a lot. And politically, I think we ought to respect people's views about what trust is. So it's going to be quite difficult to ensure that people trust a thing, even if we know that it's trustworthy. So probably the best we could try and achieve here would be people achieving something like incompletely theorized agreement, right? Just an idea from Cass Sunstein, that people might not have a people might not all agree on the reasons why this ought to be trusted, but at least behaviorally they'll act as though it ought to be trusted for whatever reason, maybe because they get something out of it, not because they trust it, but it'll be good for me, whatever it is. So people can agree to the same policy approach for all sorts of different reasons. And we're talking about a sort of a massive international agreement. If we were to try and solve the international problem of antimicrobial resistance. So I don't know whether that would satisfy the thick account that I'm giving here of that people trust it because it's trustworthy, because I'm not sure that everyone would be trusting it in that case. They might just be doing it for reasons of prudence. And if it's not trustworthy, then we would need to regulate against companies trying to cultivate merely descriptive social license, just kind of trying to bamboozle people into doing what they want, right? Which is the concern with the extractive mining type use of social license, that let's just give a whole lot of money to the community, then maybe they'll just agree to what we do, or let's withhold information about our pollution statistics. Okay. So you'd have to have some good regulations in there. So conclusion very, very quickly is just that social license is a big problem here for One Health, particularly if it's digital, and particularly to the extent that AI is involved. And it's a problem for both the normative and descriptive aspects of it, I think. Trust as a concept seems to need some degree of vulnerability, right? And uncertainty. If I know exactly, what someone's going to do, then it doesn't make any sense for me to say that I trust them to do it. Just know that they're going to do it, right? So we need some uncertainty and vulnerability towards the things that we trust. But I think in this case, it seems like there's a lot of uncertainty, and that would mean that it's a real big challenge for trust. So that's my conclusion. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mike. I should have offered that you might want to call on the questions yourself.
Oh,
I don't know
sure.
if that's the case, or I can manage it.
No, I can call on questions.
Okay.
Yes, great.
So then I think just to note to the people on Zoom that if you want to ask a question, just put it in the chat or else raise your hand. And yeah, if you want to do that thing where you can see, you could even stop the share, yeah. And then, yeah, now we can see you.
Great.
You could click on it,
Yeah.
gallery view.
Yeah.
You want to see if anyone online has a question?
Yeah, any questions online?
Yes, I'm in this.
There's
group.
no
You wanna
digital One Health in animals and antimicrobial resistance. I expect Simon.
Well, thanks, Mike. I am curious about the way that social license may or may not be a important thing to think about. I think I've missed a step somewhere. So could you give an example of why or how AI would be useful in addressing the antimicrobial resistance
Sorry, yeah.
problem?
So in order to address the problem, you need a lot of data about where bugs are arising.
Yeah.
You need information about why that might help you answer the question about why they're arising there.
Yeah.
And also what their consequences are in that place.
Yeah.
And you need to unite all of that data across, I don't know, at its biggest scale, the world. But even just looking in New Zealand, this is a massive sort of data problem, right? First, there's generating the data, and some of that data is stuff you need to just observe to find out. But then once it's in a system, some of that can be extracted from other databases, like the databases of veterinary clinics and so on. They have to agree to share their data, right? So getting systems communicating is something that AI could be involved in, as well as once you have big data sets, going over it and spotting patterns between causes and effects, or locations and other locations, and you might have information about stock movements and so on. So you've got, and this is sort of just thinking about New Zealand, you would have all sorts of information about pet owners, the pets, the homes that they're in, their income. You'd have farmers, you'd have animals in the environment as well, potentially. And that's a case where drone surveillance, which is something that people couldn't physically do, but AI could do, detecting animals. It's already used in animal welfare science to interpret animal behaviors and so on, to look at their welfare. That's the kind of thing that Digital One Health envisions, that you have a lot of digital systems operating, and then you need a good way to bring together these massive data sets and spot patterns. And that bringing together and spotting patterns is mainly the thing that the AI would be envisaged to be involved in.
So this issue overlaps considerably with the discussions that have been happening around big data sets.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. And then once you've spotted patterns or whatever, and you've got AI doing that, then it's working out what to do. And AI decision making is something that people are now, that seems to be working as well. So getting the AI to go, okay, here's all the values at stake, here's all the people at stake, here's the animals, the environmental factors, and so on. Here's what ought to happen given the policy settings in the different countries and all that. So it's just this enormous amount of data. If you wanted this to work as it's sort of incredibly ambitious vision of the health of the world.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
No, good. That's helpful. Sorry,
I just want to follow up on that. What's to stop creating systems that just don't go as far as you described? So it seems like there's lots of helpful things that digital systems and AI and big data can get to, but then there's that last bit of making decisions.
Yeah.
Because the most problematic part of what you described was that values alignment thing, which we know isn't even quite how we make it. I mean, anyway.
Yeah.
Why not stop short of that and say the data we have is this now, we humans have a problem to solve together?
Yeah, totally. So that's certainly what you could do. So that means falling, well, so yes, you could do that. That's sort of the equivalent of putting the human in the chain at some point, right? So that's possible and would help to solve the problem. You just use AI in ways that you can understand it. Yep. And in fact, AI could be used to solve privacy problems. If it's just, people might be, if they understand, if they sort of, I don't know, if it's set up in the right way and they understand it, might be more accepting of AI looking over all their data and doing that in an anonymized kind of way, or maybe it's an identified kind of way, but then all the information that comes from it is going to be anonymized and aggregate or something like that. So it could be used in ways that actually solve some of these privacy problems much better than having people do it. That would be a good approach. The concern I have, and I think, is that it falls short of the kind of expensive vision and everything. And so in terms of maximally realizing the benefits of this proposal, then what you'll be doing is we're trading off trust and predictability against benefit. And the AI maximalists say, at some point, you just got to go for it, and there's definitely people who say that maybe that would work for a while. And they say this with cars, I think, as well, AI cars. You'd perhaps let people drive their own cars. That's the ultimate human in the chain thing. We know that there's all sorts of problems that come with that. And then once people see the statistics, perhaps, that everyone in self-driving cars is much safer, then they start to, in fact, the social license for people in cars starts to get eroded. And they're like, hey, why did you have a risky human in the car? Who knows? Have they had something to eat? Have they been drinking or whatever it is, So in that case, once you get a bit of the information, see a thing working, then maybe they think, oh, okay, I trust this a bit more. So doing that sort of graduated approach would be a good way to do it. If I was thinking just of the descriptive side of it, I would aim to do that as well. Get people used to it. Make it seem like it's just a good thing. And then, but whether we could take that further step, I think would be, seems to be the bigger problem.
Following up on that, it's way you describe that, trading off privacy and intrusion for benefit. This sounds like almost an all-encompassing surveillance state.
Yes, yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Look, I understand that, if you want, Mrs. Green's little tabby cat develops antibiotic resistance to something that you want to, it doesn't not seem like overkill that, maybe one case there, the antibiotic resistance develops.
Yep.
Antimicrobial resistance develops. But we're not just talking about privacy intrusion, we're talking about complete and utter surveillance of all application of antimicrobial medications.
Yeah.
Doesn't that kind of undermine nearly all of personal property rights and independence? There's something really mass surveillance in this.
Yeah. So I mean, so you could go, well, privacy, individual privacy is so important that, let's think of the tabby cat. Damn it, privacy is important. So I'm not going to cough up that information. And that works for the next one as well, and the next one, and the next one. So at some point you do have to be giving this information. Right?
Is it such a big step though? Like mass surveillance is, a grand term, but the government already knows how much I earn.
Yeah.
The council already knows I have a dog. And now know you gave your dog antibiotics. How did it work out? She's fine.
Yeah.
And that would be it, right?
Yeah. So
is there more that I should be worried about?
It would be, because what we're talking about here is it goes in as deep as you said, genomes that are passed from one organism to another. Antibiotic resistance showing up from antimicrobials used in one maybe food species showing up in humans. To get that level of data, you're looking at gene analysis. We're talking complete and utter informational capture here. For you to be able to monitor every single or the level of identification of development of antimicrobial resistance, you're talking about. I'm not even sure AI is even powerful enough at that point to even contain that amount of information. But and then you've got the exploitative risk. So
totally.
Yeah.
So there's huge. Absolutely. So there's huge risk. And from the one digital health perspective, there's a lot of benefit. So can we solve the risk problem? Right now, if it's a privacy problem, that's just in privacy, the interest is in control of your information. Then maybe that can be solved, provided you have whatever the control is that you need. So you might need people to work out what is the control of that. Simon doesn't need much control over his animal health information, perhaps. Doesn't need much control over his income information in some contexts, right? And so it could be that a lot of these privacy issues could be worked through. And maybe you find that there's hard cases where you can't actually solve the problem. And then maybe just go, well, that's a limitation, or limitation on the system. There's some stuff we just wouldn't do. Or like in the case of the drivers, we see at this point so much benefit that can come from giving this information that people go, oh, I don't mind. And in fact, it would, one thing would be you just ask people for this information, like, oh God, I'm so sick of being asked for this information or collecting it or whatever. It'd just be easier if I had a digital system do it for me. And you see people do this sort of thing all the time, for convenience or whatever reason they agree to do it. And whatever reason they sort of decide to do it, they may end up trusting it, or they may not. But I agree. There's a sort of there's a version of this which is a distasteful surveillance sort of state, at least when it comes to the health side of it. And then you think, oh, but it, maybe it goes beyond health. Maybe they, start to say all sorts of other things, and it starts to get into other aspects of people's lives. And that's where the trust in AI problem seems like a big problem. If it was to say, hey, here's how you solve this problem, do something to do with your I don't know, something to do with the way people are employed or something like that. And we're like, well, I don't know why would that affect it? Well, the AI has said that it is, and it tries to offer some explanation. Perhaps maybe we can understand that. So I completely agree with you. There's a problem here that may just mean that actually this can't be achieved at the level that's sort of ultimately envisioned there. And maybe that's just good. That's the trading off of, that we can't achieve it. It's the trading off of health and ultimately, to some extent, well-being, human animal well-being, against other moral values. And that should be a good outcome, I think, right? So there's no, but you're going to have people who are sort of health maximalists, public health people perhaps, or whatever, who would be, giving some values a really good run for their money. And so you'd need this sort of discussion. Yep. Good question, thanks.
Got time for one more question, maybe?
Any other any online? Grant.
Oh,
Sorry.
there's John.
Oh, John.
No, he
Oh,
doesn't.
just come up. Okay, see you, John. Grant.
3 A's come to mind. Asimov,
Yes. Great.
the Australian film The Castle, and Thomas Aquinas. Now, the way they relate is this: Asimov envisaged a world designed by a maximal AI system in which humans had to take their place. That was the culmination of the iRobot series, and it pictured a dystopia. The Castle, of course, pictured a legislative system that controlled so much of people's lives but overrode it in the interests of big business, until the castle stood up to them with a savvy lawyer, of course, who was a QC, and of course we all know what an amusing person that is. And the third thing is Aquinas, who commented in the Middle Ages about the utter impossibility of thinking that an all-knowing, all-doing system such as God could ever understand what it was like to be a human being and see the world with human values at the center of their being. And of course, Aquinas then gave that as a justification for the incarnation, God becoming Christ and suffering and dying as a human being. And as that being the only sustainable outlook we could ever have on balancing our life against all the big, glossy, good things we can think of in our mind. So I just wanted to mention the 3 A's.
That's excellent. Thanks, Grant. I think that's probably a good good closing comment.
Thank you very much, Mike.
That's all right.
Thanks. Please
Thanks,
join me in
everyone.
thanking Mike. The next seminar is on Monday, March 4th, from 1 to 2. And our speaker is David Hood from the University of Otago, and he's going to be speaking about the weaponization of health data, topic that is right in the news right now. His talk is entitled False Claims of Mass Death Following COVID Vaccination. And that seminar will take place here in the Bioethics Centre. He, I think, is going to be here in person, I think. But in any case, you can join via Zoom if you aren't able to be here in person. And if you want to be on the mailing list for that, just write to bioethics@otago.ac.nz. Thank you very much. Thank you, Zoom audience. Thank you.